They always said my brother and I were inseparable. Two sides of the same coin. That's what my mom used to say. But I've learned that some coins land face up, and some are buried in the dirt. My name is Madison. I was the quiet one, the planner, the listener, the one who cleaned up after everyone's mess. And my brother, Ryan, he was the golden child. Charming, smart, the one who could do no wrong. Until he did. When our father died, I thought grief would bring us closer. It didn't. It turned everything into a war I didn't even know I was fighting. The will was read on a cold morning in February. I remember the lawyer's voice shaking slightly as he said the words that changed everything. Quote, "The family business, Reynolds & Co., will go to Ryan. The house to Madison." Unquote. It sounded fair. At least it did until I found out what the house really meant. 6 months later, the bank called. Apparently, the mortgage hadn't been paid in over a year. Ryan had convinced Dad to refinance it to fund his expansion project. He'd use the house as collateral. My inheritance was a debt in disguise. I confronted him the next morning. I said, "You said Dad trusted you with the finances." Ryan didn't even look guilty. He just smirked and said, "Dad trusted me because I knew what I was doing. You never understood business." I snapped, "You stole from him. You stole from me." He leaned back in his chair, sipping coffee like it was a joke. "It's called keeping the family legacy alive. You got the house. Be grateful." Grateful. That word burned through me like fire. I spent the next few weeks in silence. Not because I forgave him, but because I was planning. Revenge isn't born in anger. It's born in the quiet moments when you finally stop crying and start calculating. I went through Dad's old files, his emails, his client records. There were payments, secret transfers, and one that stood out, a fund Ryan had created under a fake name, M. Daniels. Same initials as mine. Coincidence? No. He was using my name to move money, quietly, illegally. That's when the first piece of my plan fell into place. I made copies. Every document, every transfer, every email. I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to destroy the version of himself he worked so hard to protect. A month later, Ryan invited me to his engagement dinner. Big house, fancy people, fake smiles. I wore a black dress, not for fashion, but for mourning. Mourning the illusion that I ever had a brother. He said, "Madison," loud enough for the room to hear. "Glad you could make it. Family always comes first, right?" He had no idea I'd already sent an anonymous email to one of his business partners, a little preview of the fraud documents, just enough to plant a seed. I smiled. "Of course, Ryan. Family first." My voice was calm, sweet, but inside I could feel the storm rising. Every fake laugh that night felt like a countdown. He toasted his fiancée, his success, his empire, and I raised my glass to his downfall. By the time dessert was served, his partner had already left the room to make calls. I watched his phone light up over and over. He ignored it at first. Then he started to sweat. Something in his perfect little world was starting to crack. I excused myself and walked outside, into the cool night air. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of finally taking back control. I looked up at the house, the lights glowing through expensive windows, and whispered, "You shouldn't have underestimated me." Inside, I could hear raised voices, his fiancé asking questions, his partner demanding explanations. I smiled. It was only the beginning. Because when you steal everything from someone who's already lost it all, they have nothing left to lose. The weeks after the dinner moved like a pulse, fast and inevitable. My inbox filled with messages I pretended not to read. My phone vibrated with anonymous kips and lead after lead from the private investigator I had hired. I let it all come to me. I was patient, ruthless in the way only someone with nothing left to lose can be.
Ryan tried to keep his schedule the same: meetings, calls, photo ops. But the cracks showed. He stopped being charming. He started being careful. People who used to laugh at his jokes stopped laughing. They listened for the trap. I watched him from the shadows of his own life, documenting every small tremor. The investigator found the safe deposit box. It took one key, a careful bank clerk, and a quiet Saturday morning to get me inside. I held my breath when I opened it. Inside, ledgers, receipts, a second set of financials that matched none of the public records. He'd been siphoning funds, small at first, then bolder, moving money through shell companies and ghost invoices. The handwriting on one memo matched the same initials Ryan used in Dad's office files. Proof. I made copies. I timestamped them, sent PDFs to 3 people who could not ignore them: a former partner who had been cheated out of a deal, a journalist who had always smelled corruption, and a lawyer known for taking large, messy cases to trial. I didn't sugarcoat anything. Facts, dates, account numbers, the quiet bones of a scandal. Then I watched the fallout. The partner called first, voice shaking with disbelief. He asked questions I already had answers for. He promised he'd look into it. The journalist replied with one line: "This is bigger than you think. Send everything." The lawyer said simply, "We'll meet tomorrow." That night, I sat on the roof of my small apartment building and let the city noise wash over me. I thought about my father, about his laugh, the stupid jokes he told us at dinner, the way he'd put his hand on my shoulder and say, "You'll be fine, kiddo." I promised I would. I promised I'd finish what he started, honestly, if no one else would. The lawyer called the next morning and asked to meet at a cafe downtown. He was careful, professional, someone who had seen too many lies. He flipped through my copies without looking up. When he did, his expression changed. He said, "This is enough to reopen an investigation. But public pressure helps." He suggested a timeline. I smiled inwardly. Timelines mean deadlines. Deadlines mean panic. So I moved the pieces. I leaked a small cache to the journalist, just enough to prompt a query. The article that followed was merciless in its restraint, a one-column piece that hinted at mismanagement and questionable transfers. It named no names. But the right people read between the lines. Ryan's world started to tilt. A board member called him in for a private meeting. A banker asked for clarifications. The firm's clients, the very people who trusted his face and handshake, began to ask for audits. I watched him field calls with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was drowning, slowly, publicly, and elegantly painful to witness. I could have stopped there. I could have folded the papers and returned to some anonymous life. But revenge isn't about satisfaction. It's about consequences. So I opened another door. I contacted the bank where the shell companies were registered. I arranged meetings under the guise of a compliance review. I planted questions, small slips that made people look twice. An auditor sent an email. An internal review began. The more they pulled, the more they found. Every hidden invoice led to another shadow. Every shadow had a name connected to Ryan's inner circle. Meanwhile, I wrote a letter to my mother. Not an apology, no, not even close. A confession disguised as truth. I told her I knew everything, that I'd seen the forged signatures, the misplaced trust, the money Ryan stole. I asked her one question. When did family stop meaning honesty? She didn't respond in words. She sent me a wire transfer. $50,000 without a message. Guilt money. Hush money. Blood money. I didn't touch it. I left it to rot in the account as evidence. Ethan texted 2 days later. They're losing it. Ryan's tearing the house apart looking for who leaked it. I didn't answer. Let them guess. Let them destroy themselves trying to find the ghost I'd become. The breaking point came on a gray Thursday. The board convened an emergency meeting. The local paper, bigger now, with a headline that left no room for speculation, ran the story. Financial irregularities at Reynolds and Company under investigation. The phone lines lit up. Investors demanded answers. Ryan's calendar emptied of social events filled with damage control. That night, I got another text from Ethan. He knows it's you. My heart didn't race. It slowed. There's a difference between being hunted and being ready. I poured a glass of wine and waited. An hour later, a car stopped outside my building. Headlights off. I didn't move. The footsteps were heavy, uncertain. A fist hit the door once, hard. Then silence. I looked through the peephole. He'd come himself. Ryan. I didn't open it. He stood there, breathing, muttering something under his breath before he turned and left. When I stepped outside later, I found an envelope on the floor. Inside was a photo. Me as a kid, sitting on Dad's shoulders. On the back, Ryan had written, "You started this. Don't cry when it ends." I smiled, not out of joy, out of recognition. He finally saw me not as the sister he could silence, but as the threat he couldn't contain. And that was the point. I didn't want forgiveness anymore. I wanted fear. And I had it. The next morning, the lawyer called. He said, "The firm's freezing his assets. He's finished." I thanked him, closed my eyes, and exhaled. The city outside hummed like nothing had changed. But I had. The storm had finally turned in my favor. The morning of the hearing felt unreal. Cameras crowded the steps of the courthouse, microphones glinting in the early light. Madison walked straight through them, head high, heartbeat steady, eyes unflinching. Inside, the air was thick with whispers. Reporters murmured Ryan's name like a warning. For months, his firm had been under review, every file, every transaction, until the evidence formed a picture too sharp to ignore. When the board chair called his name, Ryan stood, the charm gone from his voice. His defense was calm at first, statistical, careful, desperate. But the more he spoke, the clearer the truth became. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did Madison's documents. The lawyer beside her passed a quiet nod. It was time. Madison rose, walking toward the panel. Every step echoed like a countdown she'd waited her whole life to hear. She handed over the final set of records, the missing pieces that tied every transfer back to Ryan's approval codes. The room fell silent. Ryan's expression changed. First disbelief, then something close to fear. The head of the board cleared his throat and said only 4 words. "We have everything we need." In the hallway afterward, flashes erupted. Questions swirled, statements, speculations. But Madison didn't stop. She stepped into the daylight, feeling the air shift around her, lighter, cleaner. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding behind anyone's shadow. The weight that had followed her, the guilt, the grief, the need for validation, fell away with every stride. She wasn't the forgotten sister anymore. She was the truth that couldn't be buried. That night, news anchors told the story. The financial scandal, the suspension, the quiet hero who came forward. They used her name, Madison Reynolds, and for once, it sounded like it belonged to her. She sat by the window of her apartment, city lights blinking like distant stars. Her phone buzzed again and again. Calls she didn't answer, messages she didn't need to read. The truth was enough. Her father's legacy was clean again, and her own story finally had space to breathe. She opened her laptop, typed a short note to the journalist who had trusted her. "Thank you for believing that silence isn't the same as peace." Then she closed the screen and exhaled. Down below, traffic hummed. Somewhere in the distance, the courthouse lights still burned, but Madison didn't look back. Her fight was over. Her name was hers again. The city moved on, but every time a breeze passed through the open window, she heard her father's voice, warm and certain. "You'll be fine, kiddo." And for the first time, Madison smiled and believed it. The end.